In this lesson, we are going to look at solving quadratic equations by completing the square, actually. And then for the first example, we have this in standard form. Now, what we want to do is, these steps that we're going to follow are quite standard for all of the sums when you do completing the square, when you want to solve for x. So first of all, there's two things you want to do before you can start completing the square, and that's to get all your x's on the one side and all your constants on the other side. So this would look like this: 5x squared plus 7x equals to 2. All right, that's the first thing. The next thing is that this coefficient over here, remember when we actually just completed the square, we can't have this coefficient over here. So we need to get rid of that by dividing everything with whatever that value is, with 5. Okay, that leaves us with x squared plus 7 over 5x equals to 2 over 5. Alright, so this is then where we want to be at, and then we can start by completing the square. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to just start by writing down the first two terms, 7 over 5. Then we're going to take the coefficient of x, and we're going to add that. We take this, divide it by 2 and square it. But we're going to add it on both sides, because what you do on the one side, you have to do on the other side. So I'm going to say plus. Now, if I take 7 over 5 and I divide it by 2, then it's the same as 7 over 5 divided by 2, which is 7 over 5 multiplied by 1 over 2, which then becomes 7 over 10. So in general, you don't have to actually go through all of the steps. You can use your calculator and do that. But in general, if you divide a fraction by 2, the denominator just gets doubled. So I'm going to say, okay, 7 over 10 squared. Okay, and then I'm going to add it on the other side as well. Plus 7 over 10 squared. Okay, now we can start simplifying. Now this is in its standard form. Now we can put it in its factored form by writing this value, this x over here, this sign, and whatever's inside that square bracket. So that's just 7 over 10. And that's all squared. Okay, and then on this side we can just simplify that, and we'll use the calculator to do that. So we're going to have 2 over 5 plus, and 7 squared is 49, and 10 squared is 100. Okay, and that gives us 89 over 100. So 89 over 100. Okay, so now once it is in its completed square form, what we can do now is start to solve for x. And to solve for x, to get x on its own, there's two things we need to get rid of. We need to get rid of the square over here by taking the square root on both sides, and then we need to get rid of this 7 over 10 by just taking it over to the other side. Okay, so taking the square root on both sides, remember when you take the square root of a number, you have to say plus or minus that number, because minus 2 times minus 2 can be 4, or 2 times 2 is 4. So that means if you take the square root of something, it can be either minus 2 or 2, or both plus or minus. Okay, so this is x plus 7 over 10, because this and this just cancels each other. And then here the 100 can come out, so we'll just have plus or minus the square root of 89 over 10. If we take the square root of 100, it goes back to 10. And then finally we can just take the 7 over 10 over to the other side, and this will give us negative 7 over 10 plus or minus square root of 89 over 10. Now I can just the final step to rewrite that in its simplest third form. We'll have minus 7 plus or minus square root of 89 all over 10. Now if they say give the answer in its simplest third form, this will be your answer. But if they say give your answer to 2 decimal places, then we're just going to type that into the calculator. And remember, this is two answers. The one is minus 7 plus square root of 89, and the other one is minus 7 minus square root of 89. So typing that in, let's start with the negative. Let's say we've got minus 7 minus square root of 89 over 10. Okay, and that gives us, so now we have that square form, but if I press SD, then it gives me the decimal places. Okay, so we have negative 1,64 if we round it off to 2 decimal places, or then we just go back, and we're not going to delete everything, we're just going to go back to change the negative into a positive. Right, and then we press SD again, and then we'll get 0,24, or x is equal to 0,24, and that is then our two answers, or the two roots of this equation. Right, and then for the second example, we can see that this isn't in standard form, so the first thing we need to do is to put it in standard form first. We're going to multiply out these brackets, so we have x squared plus 2x minus 3x, and then minus 6 equals to 6. And then I'm going to take this 6 over, and I'm just going to simplify this by adding those like terms. So x squared minus x equals to, so this becomes a plus. 6 plus 6 is 12, all right? And now it's in the form where I can do completing the square. And the coefficient over here is -1. So I'm going to write down the first two terms, and then I'm going to add 1 over 2, and I'm going to square it. Okay, and then what I do on the one side, I have to do on the other side, so I'm also going to add here 1 over 2, and I'm going to square it. Okay, and then putting this in its factored form, we write that x, that sign, and whatever's inside these brackets is a half, and we put that to the power of 2 equals to, and then simplifying that on the calculator, that is just 12. That is 12 plus 1 over 4, and that gives us 49 over 4. Okay, now taking the square root on both sides, this will simplify nicely because both of these are perfect squares. So this cancels, and then x minus a half is equal to, so that becomes 7 over 2, so plus or minus 7 over 2. Take over the half, x is equal to positive a half plus or minus 7 over 2. And then we can just simplify it to say that x is equal to 1 plus or minus 7 over 2. And then we have x being either 1 minus 7, which is -6 over here, over 2, so -6 over 2, and that's just -3, or x is equal to 1 plus 7 over 2, so that becomes 8 over 2, and that is equal to 4.